you are committing a crime. You know why? Because you are taking a white man's land. You are taking the land, and this land belongs to Umlungu. So we must protect the Europeans against the non-Europeans. That's why we are called here. Because no one must disturb the peace of white people. Who are you to disturb the peace of white people? How do you disturb the peace of white people? Because you want to take the land of white people, and the ANC shall punish you for disturbing the peace of white people, because white people are untouchable. White people, they are from heaven. No one dares touch white people. You touch a white person, you will go to jail. So black people, you are subjects of white people. Even under ANC, even under the so-called democracy, you are subjects, you are servants of white people. No white man will be served by me. I do not serve white masters. I will never serve white masters. I'm here to disturb a white man's peace. They are right. The white man has been too comfortable for too long. They've been swimming in a pool of privilege. They've been enjoying themselves because they always owned our land. We, the rightful owners, our peace was disturbed by white men's arrival here. They committed a black genocide. We are not calling for the slaughtering of white people, at least for now.
Once people had stepped beyond the first step of actually killing, throwing a child down and hacking them to death, opening the womb of pregnant, there's nothing that was left that they couldn't do. Because they were being told by the politicians who are giving them the alcohol that if you don't destroy these people, these animals, they are coming to finish you. None of you will survive. And they had been made to believe it. I don't want to give an excuse for them. They were willing killers, there's no doubt in my mind. But see, at the back of their mind, the radio is telling them they are coming to finish you. If you don't kill them yourselves, their plan is to finish you. Genocide never happens as a surprise. Never. The signs are usually available and apparent.
Welcome to Old Speak with Luke Izaak. Today I am with Simon Roche from Satelenders in South Africa. Simon, thanks for coming. We're going to get through a few issues here. This is an issue, the land expropriation and the horror of what's going on in South Africa that we are really woefully ignorant on in Australia.
Yes.
It was Peter Dutton who basically opened up the door to some South African refugees, and many of us who are interested had to give ourselves a quick crash course in recent history in South Africa. And that, well, I mean, you've got a history going back to the 16th century, you know, a couple of hundred years before, essentially, Australia. So this is very, very complicated. And without getting bogged down in the weeds too much, I will say there is a general apathy. I think I was spoiled for the Afrikaans accent. I was probably 6 or 7 when I saw The Power of One. And that was just a wreck. You know, we're looking at apartheid and we're looking at the horrors of what was going on there. And that's basically been the mainstream narrative in the West as to the lived experience, to use a communist term, because we will get to communism shortly, of the white population in South Africa. Now, we've had a few marquee moments, the death of Winnie Mandela, which I'm sure you've got plenty to talk about. In very recent history, the Jacob Zuma, is that correct? Forced to stand down
Yes.
through corruption,
Yes.
his shady business deals, raiding the coffers. But let's really speak to me as I were a child, because we really need to go back to the beginning. You have a country of 56 million people, okay? And only 8% of you, 8.4% of you, according to the 2011 census, are white.
That's correct.
Okay, so please break down where you're currently at, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper beneath the surface as to what your organization's doing and how we need to wake up in the West.
The first thing I'll say as far as where we stand at the moment is concerned is to provide this reference point. The homicide rate in the USA is 4.88 people per 100,000. There's a tremendous hysteria about that, as you know, people marching through cities and saying, take away the guns and what have you. Huge homicide rate, 4.88. Can you imagine? Mm-hmm. The homicide rate in South Africa is 52 per 100,000. So more than 1,000% greater.
Wow.
And nobody's talking about it. But it gets better or worse. The murder rate of farmers in South Africa is, the South African police refuses to release the relevant statistics. So a few different organizations, credible organizations with statisticians and researchers, properly equipped people, have worked out that the minimum homicide rate of South African farmers is 97 per 100,000, but perhaps as high as 133 per 100,000. And the 133, let me just emphasize, is not some sort of wild exaggeration, the absolute maximum possible. It's a figure that was presented in our parliament, and it was substantiated and well substantiated. So for the average Australian, I would say that the first thing to understand is that there is, in simple mathematical terms, a massive, massive, massive crisis. Not by our standards, but by the standards of the world. If there can be all the shrieking hysteria across BBC that there has been, not to mention ABC, NBC, CBS, Canal Plus, etc., 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 if there can be all that shrieking hysteria over a murder rate of 4.88 in the USA, then we'd like just a little bit of shrieking hysteria over a murder rate of 97 or 133, please. The other thing to point out is that there has been a kind of a steady trajectory towards what you might, in simple terms, call communism over the past 24 years. The first multiracial democratic elections occurred on the 27th of April 1994, and they were won by the African National Congress under the leadership of Nelson Mandela. So we've had almost 24 years of multiracial democracy, the new South African Rainbow Nation, as it's called.
That's right, yeah.
Over that period of time, the government has become gradually more and more prejudicial to white people. Initially, their promises over the period, let's say 1990 to 1994, were, we will hold private property rights sacrosanct or inviolable, if you like, and we will give everybody an equal opportunity, and so on and so forth. Instead, what has happened is that, for example, they've implemented a series of affirmative action laws called broad-based black economic empowerment, which stipulate that any company dealing with any company that deals with the state, in other words, a filter down effect to the third level. Mm-hmm. And if any of your listeners are mathematicians or engineers or scientists, they'll understand what that means in effect. In any society, in any modern society, the state is the largest purchaser of goods and services. Yes. So if the largest purchaser of goods and services says to its suppliers that their suppliers must all have a minimum 25% plus one share, not 26%, 25% plus one share black ownership, naturally that will squeeze out white ownership in the economy, because there's a multiplier effect. On top of that, any company that has 26, 27, 28, 50, 60, 70% black ownership scores an additional point in any tender process. So let's say you're selling tires, fantastic Goodyear tires, and you want to put them on our government's fleet of Mercedes, which, as you would expect, we have a lot of.
Yeah.
And I'm selling kind of Fong Kong tires, and my Fong Kong tires are $100 a tire, and yours are $50 a tire, but the quality is 3 times better. If I have a higher proportion of black ownership in my business, I can win the contract, even though the goods or services that I'm rendering are patently inferior. Another illustration of how our society is, or how our government is pushing our society towards a kind of a quasi-communist orientation, is that the land expropriation without compensation motion that was recently passed, in fact, refers to the nationalization of all property. That was
this is the very thing that I was going to get into later, but all across the Western world, we've seen this slide into communism. Between the 60s and the 80s, it was really in the institutions in a big, big way. But from the 80s onwards, all across the Western world, and this is my biggest bugbear about what I'm looking at in South Africa right now. The intersectionality, the black identity, the lived experience, all of this language is being used at every time I watch a video of your parliament over there. It's all communism at its very root. And I really, the thing that really terrifies those of us who have been keeping our finger on the pulse of our own societies, our own heritage, has been watching again this love of state and this love of communism sweeping through our education system, through media, through the academy, through every institution. Okay. Now, can you just wind back and explain to me where the roots of communism started entering your political discourse in South Africa?
Well, the African National Congress was formed under a different name in January of the 8th of January, I believe, 1912. And initially, it was very much an Africanist institution.
Yes.
But in the 1930s, we received an influx of Jews, as it happens. They could have been anybody, they could have been Martians, but it was Jewish people fleeing communist states such as Lithuania. We got a large influx of Lithuanian Jews in South Africa.
Yes.
And they began to have quite a strong influence upon the African National Congress. So they were bringing with them communist ideology to South Africa. And post-World War II, the similar thing happened. And it reached the point where the famous African National Congress Freedom Charter, which is the African National Congress's manifesto and almost its constitution in one. The African National Congress is built on the foundations of the Freedom Charter, where it was written by a guy called Samuel Marx and
the irony.
And 3 Lithuanian immigrants, 2 men and the one guy's wife. She did the typing. So you can see for yourself that whether, being anti-Jewish is completely immaterial. People always point fingers about this kind of thing, it's the Jews, or it shouldn't be the Jews, or whatever it is. That's besides the point. The point is that here come in these people from communist societies, and they begin to share an intellectualism with an organization and construct its very ideological foundations and there's very little indigenous input into it, and the external input is overwhelmingly communist in nature. You just can't get around it.
But we're seeing a similar time frame with Marxism and communism all across the English-speaking, or at least cultures that shared Western values. It seems to be the same time frame across Australia, the United States, Europe. You're watching the same thing, and this is one thing that did interest me because it has taken this long to come to fruition. Though we have our serious problems here with gender theory, sex ed in schools, the institutionalization of children, being a very, very socialist, collectivist understanding, outworking here. I think the thing to me that has been most shocking about South Africa has been all of the rhetoric is almost its word. I mean, you're this far from genocide, according to genocidewatch.org, okay? And we will get into that in a moment. But the outworking of this intersectionality, the outworking of this privilege, the black identity politics, the victim becoming the oppressor sort of mentality that is taking over Western values is very close to being in its worst form we've seen in any country. Now, let's go back. We've got the National Assembly set in motion a process to amend the Constitution. Now, that was bought. This is the 27th of February this year.
Yes.
And this was by Julius Malema. Is that how I pronounce his name?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, that guy is the embodiment of communism, right? And you just have to look at it. He's a terrifying son of a gun to look at.
Yes.
And to listen to. He's hateful. He is genocidal, and it was, so this was for the expropriation of land without compensation, and it was adopted with a vote of 241 in favour and only 83 against. That is a terrifying indictment on the system there right now.
Well, that's just about 75%.
Yeah. So digging into
it was carried with a 3/4.
So expropriation of land without. Now, we saw this in Zimbabwe under Mugabe, right, where they did this. And it was only a few years later where they're begging a lot of the white farmers who were there to come back because they ran out of food, essentially. And the reality is, looking at the numbers, the South African government probably couldn't pay for the land if they wanted to anyway.
But can I just make a point here?
Of course.
Whether they could or couldn't pay for the land is somewhat moot, because a report was recently released by the Rolf Meyer Foundation, which demonstrated, and was corroborated, by the way, that 4,323 farms that have been purchased from white farmers have never been given to black owners.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So, it's
all going back to the government and laying...
It's well and good for me to walk into your shop and to say to you, Luke, Mr. Shopkeeper, I'm starving. I can't afford to buy a can of baked beans on the shelf or whatever. You should give me a free can of baked beans. Come on, Mr. Izaak, my children are starving. When I've got 10 cans of baked beans sitting on the shelf at home, it's moot. If the government could only get its act together to dish out the land that it has already bought, then we could hold a conversation about the land that it can't afford. I mean, it's absolutely, I want to use the word stupid, but it's not the right word. It's perverse. It's categorically perverse.
So your Prime Minister, is it Ramaphosa? Cyril Ramaphosa?
Yes, state president, but yes, Ramaphosa, you don't pronounce the H.
Ramaphosa, okay. So Cyril Ramaphosa.
Yes.
He referred to the taking of land, okay, which is a very contentious issue, obviously, and historically inaccurate in most cases where the Dutch are concerned, in my humble opinion. But the taking of land as the original sin of South Africa.
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yes.
So even though he's not as, in my estimation, all the way over here in the Ivory Tower, as terrifying as the EFF, he's talking the same language. And this is how the government, the ANC, was managed to get the radical, we would call them the Greens here, but the Greens still aren't in a position to kill everyone. This is the way they work hand in hand. They almost believe the same thing, but Julius Malema seems to be the guy who's allowed to say everything that the worst of the ANC is not allowed to say.
Well, let me say this to you, Luke. I think it'll help you. I beg your pardon. Before you drift too far away from a point that you made at the beginning, Cyril Ramaphosa was the ANC's Secretary General from 1991 to 1997. So he is a dyed-in-the-wool ANC apparatchik. You know, he's not some kind of moderate force, although he's seen that way. And I'll illustrate it this way. I worked in live event special projects for many years.
Sure.
And I was appointed the project manager of the entire Nelson Mandela funeral 5 years before he died. Wow. It was called Operation Necessity. And in December 2008, I was appointed the project manager of Operation Necessity. Obviously, nobody knowing exactly when he would die, but we had to prepare for it sooner or later. In between times, I had a bit of a repentance experience. Mm-hmm. And in the weeks before he died, they phoned me up 3 times and said, right, you've got to come run this project. I said, no, thank you, no, thank you, no, thank you. I'm not interested in it anymore. However, given my connections, I was able to attend the funeral. And at the funeral, I passed a complimentary remark about Cyril Ramaphosa. And a senior ANC person looked at me and snickered. And I know the guy very well, very, very well. So I said to him, come on, you don't laugh at me like that. That's humiliating in front of other people. What's so funny? And he eventually relented. And he said to me, you whites think that because Cyril Ramaphosa talks like the Queen, he's a cocoa nut. In other words, black on the outside or brown on the outside and white on the inside. Mm. But Cyril Ramaphosa is an ANC dog on an ANC leash. Cyril Ramaphosa is famously a billionaire. He said, we deployed people into various roles once we took power in 1994. He was our nominated billionaire. Everything that he has thanks to us. And we can take it all away again. He will do what we tell him, or we will take it all away. So people shouldn't be gulled by appearances. The reality is that Cyril Ramaphosa is a wolf in sheep's clothing. He is a dyed-in-the-wool to the marrow of his bones, not to mix too many metaphors.
You're walking into dangerous territory there, yeah.
Yeah, and his background is in trade unions.
Oh, so okay.
Yeah, he was the founder and head of what was at the time our most, and may still be, our most influential trade union.
Right.
So it only stood to reason. We, Saitlanders, were the only organization in South Africa which, when he was elected, said, this is not a good thing. You think you've gotten off. You think you've got the better deal, but you've gotten the worst deal. Because here's somebody who's extremely clever, but who is no less radical. And that was proven a few days later when he said at the palace of the Zulu king, after giving him a whole lot of cows as a present, we will take the land. And then initiated it a few weeks later.
Okay, now give us a breakdown. This is, okay, we need to wind this back around for a moment. For those of us who do not understand the demographics of South Africa, why is this such a big deal? We've got the murder rate that is out of control. We have a government who is taunting, and I believe it was Malema again who said, was it him who said that we're not asking for the murder of whites yet? Yeah,
I'm not calling for the slaughter of all white people yet. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, you have a certain amount of the population, the white population, who are ready to go, and many of you at Sightlanders digging in. Okay. Break down first of all the demographic. Okay. As to the blacks, the whites, what you call coloured, Indians, etc.
Yes.
Because it is very, very hard for us to wrap our head around as English speakers, living in, being a white minority in a country.
Right. Okay. It's really pretty simple. Whites comprise about 8.5% of the South African population. It's about 4.7 million people. There is a similarly large number of, just a little bit less, number of Indian people who came as sugarcane workers from India 130 odd years ago. Then the colored people, that is to say mixed race people, who specifically insist upon being identified as a separate entity to blacks, much to the eternal indignation of the ANC. They refuse to be counted as black people. These mixed race people say, we want to be called coloreds. We want to hold festivals called coon carnivals. And at the coon carnivals, we absolutely demand the right to sing Confederate, that is to say the American Civil War, Confederate supporting songs.
Wow.
And this is very famous. It's never reported, but on New Year's Day in Cape Town, you can go yourself and see tens of thousands of mixed race people walking through the streets singing songs about the Dixies, about Alabama, and so that's just the way it is, whether people like it or they don't like it.
Wow.
That's the way it is.
Because this is one thing that just does not enter our consciousness in the West, right? It is fascinating. And like in one of our first conversations when we're doing a pre-interview, you were calling people colored. I mean, this is how they demand to be called. They demand to be referred to as colored. Insist. Yes. Whereas in the United States or Australia, that would be considered offensive. Now, these are the cultural mores of your country. Nevertheless, okay, keep going with the demographics. You do have the Confederates, great.
Okay, so we've got, as I said, about 4.7 million whites, a few less Indians, and a few more coloreds. And so you're looking at around about 15 million, 14 million people who form those three significant population groups. We have four primary recognized population groups. Those are the first three. And then the balance is the black people of South Africa. Now, there are, of course, some Chinese and so on and so forth, but they're peripheral in the sense that they might form 1 million or 2 million of this picture. Sure. Significantly less than the four primary population groups. And the black people, as a matter of interest to you, a very famous census was done when South Africa became a republic. In other words, from the time that we moved out of the empire, which was in 1960. Mm-hmm. In 1960, we became an independent republic. Everything that happened before that, just to be clear, happened as part of the British Empire. You know, this is another thing that people forget. You know, the terrible white racists, the Boers, the Afrikaners. Up until the day before yesterday, it happened as part of the British Empire. Thank you very much.
Yes. Which, apropos of nothing, it was quite fascinating in one of the interviews that it might have been Stefan, that I saw, where the English were actually the first ones to run concentration camps in South Africa. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's correct. The British implemented the concentration camp system during the Anglo-Boer War, where they starved to death. The figures vary, but one of the leading authorities makes a superb case for the fact that the British absolutely understated them, and it's a mathematical case, and that they starved to death about 34,000 Christian women and children in their concentration camps in 1900 and 1901 and early 1902. Primarily 1901 and 1902. Yeah. In 1948, the whites in South Africa are beginning to kind of take control. It's still, part of the empire, but a famous census was done in 1950 in which the white population was just over 2 million and the black population was recorded at just about 5 million.
Wow.
40 years later, in 1990, just prior to the multiracial elections, the white population had increased to just over 4 million. In other words, it had doubled. And we're talking about 40 years. So just for those who don't know, a generation in sociological and anthropological terms is 25 years. Obviously, some people procreate at the age of 11, God forbid, and some at the age of 65. Good luck to them. But nominally, a generation is 25 years. So in less than 2 generations, the black population went from 5 million to 40 million. That's an 8-fold increase.
Wow.
It's beyond the imagination of people who don't engage with this subject. And many people, with all due respect, obviously we're grateful when you guys take an interest in our plight. But sometimes it's very difficult to understand how people can criticize what's happening in South Africa or criticize the plight of the whites and not have sympathy for it, because to hear them speak is to know that they haven't a clue what they're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, there's no basis, in fact, for much of what is said.
Yeah, look, and this is one of the points of a channel like this. Like, I don't want to set myself up as an authority on anything, but a fellow explorer with other journalists for really complicated topics. And this is one of those things. We do not see populations around the world where the white minority is under attack by its own government, and you know, through the rhetoric, through the use of language, through the self-identification, through our just like frogs in hot water in identity politics. It's very, very, very hard for us in the West to make sense of a plight like yours without digging deep and figuring out what's going on. Now,
you're right, Luke. Sorry, if I may just add one brief thing.
Sure.
You know, we have been persuaded in the West that we are uniquely capable of wrongfulness. You know, that every other population group in the world is a victim, and that we are the world's sole perpetrators. I'm not saying that we are pure as the driven snow. I'm not some white supremacist or supremacist. I just am not. But I would bring the following to your attention. Do you know that the average fatality rate in any European war is between 15 and 25% of the combatants?
yes.
And historically, the non-combatants, the civilian societies around, have suffered a negligible fatality rate.
Yes.
Yes, in the Napoleonic Wars, some women were raped in Spanish cities, but by and large, that is a non-occurrence.
Yeah.
It's an aberration, and
Yes.
exactly. 15 to 25%. Would you believe me if I told you that in the Mfetane Wars, this is recorded only by liberal sources? There are no conservative sources in what I'm about to tell you. The fatality rate in the Black African Wars, known as the Mfetane Wars,
Yes.
in South Africa between 1820 and 1834,
Yes.
was between 1/3 and 2/3 of the entire population, every man, woman, and child. So people have to disabuse themselves of this fallacy that white people are uniquely capable of being bad. And they need to begin to understand that black people can also be bad and can be on a good day worse. And therefore, it does stand to reason that we have this, as you pointed out, what you said is what provoked me to offer this remark, that you can have a government that is black that is wrongful and bad.
Yeah, the double think to imagine for a second that is impossible is only the result, again, of Marxism. Every time I listen to an ANC or an EFF leader, which are terrifying, talking in Parliament over there, it's dripping. It is laced with identity politics. It is laced with intersectionality and Marxism in its worst form. The scary thing is, as I will repeat this before we move on, we are seeing the end game of Marxism in a state like South Africa, where genocide is only a flick of a switch away, potentially. And this is the goal. This is the goal of white on black on colored on whatever. Gay versus Jew versus Muslim versus. This is the way communism works, and this is the way it has worked to set people against each other and identify not as South Africans or Australians, but identify as their own ethnic group. Now, look, this will be the time to switch off for those who have children in the room, but I want you to, and not to steal any of Lauren Southern's thunder, that's fine, she's got far more viewers than me, But her documentary Farmlands will be coming out very shortly, and we're very interested in actually her findings in South Africa. And I believe you spent some time with her and are featured in that documentary as well. But just to bring it home as to what is really happening, it's one thing to talk in the abstract. But the stories that I've been hearing and I've been reading about many of those on the that the government refuses to acknowledge as racially motivated murders. I'm sorry to do this to you again, and I'm sure you could never get hardened to this subject. But walk some of my viewers through what is really happening to these people.
Well, you know. Dear me,
there will be a graphic warning alert as well, so feel free to break it down.
You know, there's so many examples. I hardly know where to start and know where to finish, but I'll rattle off a few, and if you feel it's enough, just interrupt me. Don't hesitate.
Yeah.
A woman went to pick up her child from school, Elon Musk's high school. Elon Musk is from South Africa.
Yes.
And it was dusk. And before she could get to her child, wherever the child was in the school, she was accosted by 4 men and dragged onto the playing field, and she was raped to death. Well, she was raped and then raped to death with a broomstick handle. Recently, there was quite a well-known report of an elderly couple who were trussed up on chairs next to one another, and they had boiling water and boiling oil poured over them alternately. Apparently, the boiling water and the boiling oil were what the woman was cooking. It wasn't that the crooks prepared it. The woman had a pot of boiling water, who knows for what, maybe rice, and a pot of boiling oil, who knows for what, maybe chips, on the stove already. The crooks saw this and then tortured these people with, alternating the water over the woman and the oil over the man, oil over the woman, water over the man. So that was a terrible event. One woman in
just
early
to preface
2000,
this, these are landowners that the government is whipping up hate against, correct?
Yeah,
Yes.
of course.
Yeah,
Evil landowners.
Evil landowners.
Producers. Yeah.
Okay. I'll continue. Yeah.
So one lady who, it was reported by some people that she was 68, 70, 79, 91, but it's not true. She was 60 years old, had a Bosch drilling machine put to her ankles while she was trussed up in a chair, and they drilled through one ankle, then the other, then one knee, then the other, then one hip, then the other, and then wrists. And by that time, she died of the pain and the injuries. One elderly gentleman who farmed in the province of KwaZulu-Natal was recently trussed up and thrown in his Ford pickup truck, and it was locked, and he couldn't unlock it because he was trussed up inside. And then the vehicle was set alight. Another man, also in the province of Natal, quite famously, was recently stabbed to death with a pitchfork. So his 4 assailants got him onto the ground, and then they stabbed him to death with a pitchfork. There is a very well-known story of a young girl who was 4 years old, raped by 3 men, and she survived the rape.
Now, this is the one. Is this the one that was crucified to the table? She was nailed to the table. Or is this somebody else?
No, I'm going to tell you that one in a second.
Right.
So this girl was she survived the rape, as the post-mortem autopsy revealed. So they bundled her up in newspaper and put gasoline over the newspaper and burned her to death. The 3-year-old girl was raped to death by 4 men while crucified to the kitchen table of the farmstead. There's quite a well-known story. I mean, there's so many. I could speak all day.
Yeah,
of a man
I
who
know. But,
was being forced to watch his wife be raped, and she was struggling too furiously. So they, just in the spirit of painfulness, took a knife and put it under her patella, her kneecap, and cut off the kneecap while they were raping her. The husband was fighting so furiously not to watch his wife being raped that they eventually cut out his eyelids so that he wouldn't be able to close his eyes as they forced him to witness the event. And the stories go on.
Because this is the thing. This is every single time. If you see right now in the middle of Melbourne, we're having a lot of problems with the South Sudanese crime gangs, Apex and the like, and they're out of control. The numbers of the South Sudanese assaults, break-ins, etc., are terrifying. Into shops, into private homes, and the assaults on the streets. Now, none of this, as far as I'm aware, is happening. There is a special form of hatred. This isn't a crime of opportunity. To stick around and do these atrocities, commit these atrocities on these people, there is a level of malevolence, a level of hatred, a level of just evil that can't be comprehended by a crime of opportunity. And when I've looked at a lot of the government reports and the news reports from ANC and from some of your state newspapers, it's always being chalked up to robberies or crimes of opportunity. And you know this, but crimes of opportunity do not, in any profile, have this level of violence, hatred, and torture associated to a robbery. Okay, and it's. I didn't want to put my audience through too much. They can look at it themselves, but it needs to be underscored that this isn't a quick shooting or a crime of, a crime of opportunity where somebody accidentally gets killed or didn't stop screaming so they knocked their head against a table. These are torturous, disgusting acts. And I know I've read hundreds and hundreds of them, and I can't. To stare into the face of that is necessary. Look, I tell myself, look, I'm dealing with abortion very shortly in another series, and we had a pretty rough start to the year, so I had to take a break from staring at the face of quite literally dead babies before I could get back to that subject. When it comes to this, the thought of a 4-year-old girl being crucified and raped, and all these things happening in front of their parents and wives and husbands, that I've heard stories of people being shot just trying to protect their own families in front of their children. These people are never going to be the same again without an act of God. This is, you want to talk about lived experience, okay? You might have had a few generations ago, or even a couple of generations ago with apartheid, some pretty awful things happening. Any 30-year-old, anyone my age in your country right now wasn't there, wasn't part of any of those actions. Even if you were to blame any awful thing happening under apartheid on the white population, it's not our fault. It's not our responsibility. And to justify the level of these crimes, I was weeping the other day reading a few of these stories, and I can't understand the pure apathy to a lot of Australians. Now, I shared to you a video of R.V. Yemeni. He's a colleague in Melbourne who got 50,000 signatures to drop to the Foreign Minister's office of Australians who wanted to see white South African farmers come across to Australia. Okay, you might have seen that video. If you haven't, watch it. But during the refugee rally, this is where he took a camera down and he was asking people who were, asking for more refugees into the country, Syrian refugees and the like. Another misnomer. They were totally apathetic. They were totally apathetic to the plight of white farmers, and in fact deny that there was any problem happening in South Africa right now. I don't know what it's going to do other than keeping it newsworthy and keeping it in a news cycle to wake people up. But talk a little bit about what you guys are doing, because you have those who are leaving, and then Sightlanders, you guys are committed to staying on your family's land, multi-generational properties. And that is a fearsome undertaking. Yes.
Well, I'll give you one frame of reference very briefly. The increase in the number of of visa applications by South Africans to Australia between January 2015 and January 2016, I've not looked since, but 2015 to 2016 is just over 700%. Right. So it's an explosion, absolute explosion. The number of white South Africans should be something like, if we had not already had such a massive outflow of white South Africans since the Rainbow Nation utopia was implemented in 1994, should be something like 5.6 million. This is a well-known piece of research, or comes from a well-known piece of research, and it's presently about 4.7 million. So already we've had a massive outflow of the best and the brightest.
Yeah,
the reality
is a brain drain. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we Saitlanders, let me first say that Saitlanders is a civil defense organization constituted under international law, particularly, but not only, Protocols 1 and 2 additional to the Geneva Conventions, which are the international laws that govern the circumstances of civilians in conflict. The Geneva Conventions say you're not allowed to use mustard gas, you mustn't do this, you mustn't do that. The Protocols 1 and 2 additional explain how you should treat civilians. And they make specific provision for identifiable ethnic groups to gather together, to withdraw from a conflict, to become non-parties to a conflict, and to gather separate from the conflict,
Yes.
and to create a perimeter which may not be violated. And that is our raison d'etre. It's our sole purpose. Saitlander's goal is to ensure the evacuation of white refugees in the event of a civil war in South Africa in which we are targets, and to gather in a safe place. And we tend to be pretty conservative, quite Christian in orientation, not always in behavior. I mean, it would be false if I implied that we were as pure as the driven snow. But we are very conservative, and we're those people who believe that it is right to stay here.
Yes.
That our forefathers built a beautiful country, and that it's a good thing, a virtuous thing, to remain here.
Yes.
Steadfast.
Yes.
And to defend what's good and
Yes.
beautiful and true against what is barbaric. Because what's happening in South Africa now is barbaric. Our Minister of Health, famously a couple of years ago, I want to say 2 years ago, revealed that one 11-year-old girl, had had 8 abortions sponsored by the state. Okay, so there's barbarianism in our hospitals. There's barbarianism in our on our farms, in our suburbs, in everything that's happening. Our education system is becoming a perversity. The long walk through the institutions in South Africa has been a massive success. We are the canary in the coal mine.
You are.
Epitomize what is going to happen to you guys. We are the grand experiment. We are in the whole world, and you only need to think about it for about 3 seconds to grasp this fundamental concept.
The birth rate?
We are a classic case of a conservative, Western European derived culture or society that is being destroyed by modern, liberal, humanist, moral relativist values. And you guys are 3 or 4 waves behind us. But it's the same break on the same beach.
Absolutely.
It's going to end up the same way.
Now, when I first started looking at this, the Dr. Gregory Stanton from Genocide Watch had you guys of populations likely to experience genocide at 7 out of 8. That ticked over to 8 out of 8 only a fortnight ago. This is how serious Genocide Watch is taking this. Am I right?
Yeah, I haven't looked at his website for a little while. I've got my hands full of all sorts of work. It's not something that I check.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But if you say so, I believe you. You know, Dr. Gregory Stanton was a liberal, and he was he is a liberal, and he was an anti-apartheid activist.
Yes.
But he has been to South Africa, and he said, look, the facts are the facts. This is how it happens. When a genocide happens in a society, these are the phases it goes through. You guys have clearly been through these ones already. You're now standing on the cusp of a genocide. It's a scientific thing, political sympathies aside.
Yes. Now, okay. To all the naysayers here in Australia, across the UK, and in the United States who do not understand what's really going on here, where do they go to look and stare this horror in the face? To see your lived experience.
We'd certainly invite them to look at our website, Suidlanders.org. SUIDLANDERS.org.
Yes.
We'd invite them to do some Googling on YouTube. There are many videos up there that can show them some nice examples of rape and murder of little girls, the cutting open of little boys' stomachs. I don't know if I told you that story about the boy who crawled 20 yards with his entrails running out behind him just to die in the arms of his mother, a family that was butchered. But there are many such stories. Have a look at YouTube. Google South Africa, murder, farm murders, rape. It's all there. It's a liberal
I saw one
organizational group.
The Boer Project I saw that one very early on in the piece, and that had a lot of stories that brought me to tears.
They did a very good job, those Swedes. And Lauren's thing will be good as well. Lauren is a superstar. She's, for such a young person, she's wise beyond her years, and she's got a great sort of I don't know how to put it, but she's got spirit. She's up for it, and she's done a brilliant job as far as I can tell. But there are many sources if people are just willing to look. As I say, it is a group of hardcore liberal, lesbian rights activists and so on, who have recently produced the statistic that 35 out of 100 women, exactly 35 out of 100 women in South Africa will be raped.
Wow.
So if the naysayers don't like what we're saying, then they should go and take a look for themselves at whose facts and figures we are regurgitating. The facts and figures that I'm regurgitating about the Mfetane wars, the black-on-black violence, come from liberal sources. Dr. Gregory Stanton is a liberal. The People's Organization Against Women Abuse is dominated by liberals and many gays and so on. It's a very liberal entity. They don't have to believe me, but they should believe themselves, surely.
Yeah, look, now just to wrap this up, this is going to take a lot of digestion for the viewers, and hopefully we can get you back on very shortly. We've got some, after Farmlands is released, I'm sure there'll be a lot of interest and a lot of people would like to speak to you more. I do have other journalists who are very, very interested in interviewing you and getting your experience and your take as to what's happening, as the mainstream media does its best to make this a non-story. Now, with Suidlanders, you guys are digging in, and you do have a lot of You're digging in. A lot of South Africans, however, do want to leave. Is there a general attitude of exasperation from organisations like Suidlanders with those South Africans who are choosing to leave and contribute to the brain drain, as it were? Or do you understand?
We kind of understand. If you're an extremely talented doctor or entrepreneur, what have you, and you're being hamstrung by laws that prejudice your, talent, as it were, then that's human nature. You're going to leave. Or if your wife has now been raped twice in the suburb in which you live, it's time to go, isn't it?
Yeah, I've seen these statistics with the carjackings and the just the muggings and the violence. Look, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around to see this happening because we're told that we're evil and privileged from the day we're born here in the West, right? Yes. And to see...
And you didn't work for it. Your forefathers sat on their hands and watched all the castles, roads, bridges, hospitals, schools, philosophy, science build itself, right?
Off the back of slaves, that's right. Yeah, so,
Okay.
yeah, that's right. So this is the problem. This is the problem that we have right now. And to communicate this message is going to take time. Uh, a lot of you guys probably don't have. So is there a red line for you? And well, let's not talk Sightlanders. Let's talk Simon Roche right now. Is there a red line right now where you basically say, enough is enough, I can't do this anymore, and you exit? Or are you basically going to have your gun pried out of your hand, your cold dead hands, as Clint Eastwood said?
Luke, I'd love to answer that question, but I'm gonna pass on it because it's a very sensitive, difficult question for an individual who wrestles with the challenges of attacks from Antifa and false slurs. And yesterday, somebody from the USA sent one of my children a vicious, vicious message. So my children are being dragged into it. Their mother's being dragged into it. I'm being accused of stealing money and of this and sexual things and all, you name it. Every day is a difficult day when doing this job. Every day, one wonders to oneself, how much longer can we carry on? I am one of the diehards, but it's not even easy to be a diehard. So with that kind of sketchy background, I won't go into further detail. Time will tell, but I would like to believe that as a coward, and I do speak as a coward, I've never been a physically brave person. If I was, I would have been far better at rugby and I would have played for far longer.
Yeah.
But even a coward knows the difference between right and wrong. And sometimes you just have to stand with your knees quivering, and kind of hoping that you don't evacuate your bladder into your pants. So that's just a reality. Vulgar or crass as it might sound to some people, those are people who've not been in the situation. Those who have won't find it a vulgar or crass analogy. It's bloody terrifying from sometimes, it's bloody terrifying when somebody makes up some fiction, as they recently did, about our leader having 3 in a bed sex, a menage a trois.
Mm-hmm.
You wonder what else can they make up, and here they've got composite photographs of this
Wow.
irreproachable, old-fashioned Calvinist man who more or less never, leaves his wife. He's kind of an introverted family man, as it were.
Yes.
That's
Calvinism right there. Yeah.
What are they going to do to me?
Yeah. I know. Look. I understand, and I don't understand. This is going to be a journey, and short of visiting South Africa and spending a year, we have to look at this from the lived experience, there's the communist term again, of everybody involved. I'm looking at the numbers, even the stats, even the violent, whatever the motivation happened to be, these things are happening. We know why this is happening. But because we just have to listen to some of your fearless leaders over there at the moment, like the disgusting, Ramaphosa, and Ramaphosa and Malema, who he scares me just to look at. He's a Che Guevara wannabe with his anyway. The guy is scary. We know it's on the record. It's on the record every day. They're in Parliament. What they're trying to achieve by expropriating land from you guys. And the lengths they are willing to go to terrorize and put fear into you. I mean, it would be really, really, really easy for you guys right now to walk away and leave the farms for them just to go crazy, right? That would be the easiest thing you could do.
That's not our... Luke, think about it. In 732 at Tours, Charles Martel stood against the most massive onslaught of Moor warriors possible. He could have buggered off home and gone farmed wine or whatever. Instead, those men stood for Christianity. They stood for Western European civilization. The same thing in 1529 at the gates of Vienna. The same thing in 1683 at the gates of Vienna. Jan III Sobieski marched from Poland. It cost him a kingdom in the process. When he got there, he refused to let his warriors fight until they'd had a church service, Holy Mass at the time, Holy Communion, and then said individual prayers. Then he allowed them to ride down the Tannenberg Mountain with the winged hussars, the wings flying out behind them. Yes. We come from a culture which stands true. We come from a culture of self-sacrifice, but we have been misled into a paradigm of self-service. We are the sickest generation of our gene pool in history.
Amen.
You and I represent the scum of the white, Western European, Caucasian tradition. That's just a reality. We're the poorest examples. We're mere shadows of our forefathers.
Absolutely.
But even we know the difference between right and wrong. And the time must come, Luke. It must come sooner or later when we put down the pornographic magazine and we man up and take responsibility for protecting our children and our culture and our forefathers' inheritance. Otherwise, it will be all gone. You only have to compare the state of Western European-derived societies, whether it's New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the USA, or Europe, to 4 generations back, 5, 6 generations back, peanuts, to see that we are a pale shadow of our former selves.
Amen.
It's happened in a very short span of time. In a tremendously short span of time, we have been utterly corrupted by moral relativism, humanism, and communism.
And communism, nihilism, and communism. Look, Simon, thank you so much for your time. Let's do this again in the not too distant future. I'm going to have a lot of questions. People don't like to talk about the white patriarchy, the white heritage that we've inherited. And it's not about skin color. It's about value. Let's be honest. Okay. It's about how we got to where we got. And while we were sleeping, it's been taken away from us. Okay. Yes. You guys are the canaries down the coal mine right now as to how this ideology plays itself out again post-Stalin. We'll be praying for you guys. We'll be sharing and we will be doing our homework to find the best ways that we can help guys like yourself and sight lenders and South Africa as a whole to step off this ledge. If there is another act of God and there is some form of grace that we can see, it will be that the Malemas and the others just step off this ledge. They step off this ledge and they reverse what looks like is about to be one of the most avoidable genocides in recent history. Simon, thank you again. Any final words to the viewers?
Thank you. Oh, the only final words we would have is to say if people's hearts are moved, we ask please that they consider supporting us.
Yes.
On our website, satelanders.org. There's a PayPal link. Yep. Or alternatively, we are running a Free Starter campaign, which is a conservative crowdfunding platform. Freestarter.com, missing the last E. Freestarter minus the last E.com. We're running a campaign to urgently raise funds to purchase vital necessities for civilians in a crisis. Please consider helping us.
Yes.
Every dollar is much appreciated.
We'll be dropping all of those down into the show notes, and absolutely. Thank you again, Simon. God bless, and we will talk with you again very soon.
God bless you and thank you.